Got a third. I'll call this meeting to order. Welcome to the Rotary Club of Beaumont, the 72nd club founded in the world. Today, our invocation is going to be led by Sherry Pierce, Director of Neighborhood Ministries, Wesley United Methodist Church, and our pledges will be led by Josh Davis, Senior Director, Major Gifts, Legacy Community Health. Sherry?
All right, if you would pray with me, please. Our God, who loves us all in spite of all the ways that we fail you every day. We come today and we know there's a lot of suffering in this world. Many have lost their jobs, many have lost their health, and some have even lost their lives. But at the least, we've all lost some comfort in our everyday life. We thank you for those workers and those leaders who are out there every day making those tough decisions. We ask you to give us empathy and encouraging words for our friends who have suffered more than us. We ask for confidence and wisdom so that everything we do will be pleasing to you. For it's in your most holy name that we pray. Amen.
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 Josh?
Now join me in the pledges. Pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the United States of America,
and to the
republic
republic
for which it stands,
one
one
nation,
nation, under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Pledge allegiance to the Texas.
Honor the Texas flag. Honor the Texas
Under the
flag.
Texas flag, I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state under God,
one and indivisible. Thank you both. Now for club business, we have Secretary Jay Wilson, who's going to report on action from yesterday's meeting.
Thank you, ma'am. In board action yesterday, Craig Escamilla presented a draft of a new strategic plan for the club. The strategic plan committee and board will study it and work on a final presentation so it can be presented to the club in the near future. Board also approved submitting an application for a matching grant to our District 5910 to fund our annual Layette project for the women and infants in Chinandega, Nicaragua. Also, the board approved an opportunity presented to open a conversation with the advisory board of the 100 Black Men of Greater Beaumont. And John Lee is leading that exploratory effort. Lastly, each month the board has a long conversation about when we will be able to return to in-person meetings. I think everybody's ready for that. We miss the camaraderie, the shaking hands, the fellowship. And while Zoom has been a replacement, it certainly doesn't match what we were used to. As you all know, there's still a restriction in place that we cannot have large gatherings. And until that restriction is lifted, we can't return to our normal meetings. Obviously, the concern is for everybody's health and safety. So unfortunately, the Zoom meetings are going to have to continue, but we are making plans and putting protocols and measures in place to keep everyone safe when we can return to our in-person meetings. We are going to continue the flag project and other service projects because we can easily do those in small groups and practice social distancing. We are also looking at ways that we might be able to safely have some small group social events for those of us that are ready to get out and socialize a little bit. Once those plans are in place, we'll let you know more about it. And that concludes the board actions.
Thank you, Jay. Now for a report on Wind Down with Rotary, Sherry Pierce.
Okay, we have a date for Wind Down with Rotary. So get your calendars out, get ready. It's going to be on October the 7th, 2021. We decided, much to our dismay, that we just can't pull it off this year. And we need sponsors, and we just don't have that. A lot of people are not able to sponsor now, and not enough people were ready to even do small groups in their homes to make it the big, not just profitable, but the great event that it normally is. We talked about doing it in the spring. but then that would throw us off of our rotation. You know, we'd have to wait a year and a half before we could do another one, and we kind of want to leave it where it is. So we are, like we said, like Jay said, we're looking at having some small group events, and we'll be ready for Wind Down 2021. All right.
Thank you, Sherry. Thank you for all your work on checking into all of the potentials for Wind Down this year.
Well, I had great people helping me. Jackie did most of that, I will confess. But I appreciate it. And I'm in for 2021.
Thank you. Now to introduce our speaker, we have Ellen Zimmerman, owner of Ellen Zimmerman Consulting, LLC, and also my flag partner. Take it away, Ellen.
Sorry, I had to find the unmute button. I'm on the iPad today. Yes, so I've been talking with Ashley. She has spoken with students I have at Lamar. She's spoken at many conferences, and I really don't have her official bio to introduce her correctly. So I would like to ask her to please tell us much more information about her. I know she's very personable. We got a lot out of both presentations that I've personally attended with her. And I think that everyone will appreciate the information she's going to share with us. So Ashley, if you don't mind, I don't think I can do your credentials justice. Please introduce yourself. Thank you.
Sure. Yes, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you so much for having me. It's really great to be with such a large virtual group and that we're able to get together, you know, despite the current pandemic in its way. So I really appreciate y'all having me. So I'm an attorney with Littler Mendelson. I'm in the Houston office. Littler Mendelson is the world's largest labor and employment law firm. We represent management. So we represent business owners, we represent companies, even local governments. We have city clients, all kinds of HR and business professionals are who we work with. And that's from small businesses that are mom and pop or, you know, sole proprietorships all the way to Fortune 500 companies. So we have 700 attorneys worldwide, and all we do is deal with HR law, employment law issues to help companies get it right, help managers and employers get it right. And then if, you know, things go sideways and the inevitable lawsuit presents itself, we do defend those lawsuits in court for the company. So again, I said I'm in the Houston office. Each day, you know, my practice pre-COVID-19 is a little different than post-COVID-19, as I'm sure everybody's life is and business is as well. So pre-COVID-19, I was providing, and still now, lots of advice and counsel. So getting calls about employee handbooks. I need to update these policies. What are the latest best practices and guidance on how we respond to employee complaints of discrimination or harassment or pay issues, things like that. You know, do we have enough reason to terminate this person? Putting together severance agreements, those types of advice work is what I do. And then, as I mentioned, I also do litigation. So in court, you know, virtually now, and that's in arbitration and mediation and traditional court cases. So that's just a little bit about me and my firm. So today, speaking of, so I said my practice has changed a lot. Now it's a lot of COVID questions and questions about the Families First Coronavirus Response Act and what do business owners do? What do employers do when trying to deal with these issues with their employees in a compassionate way, but also dealing with the business realities? What are y'all's options? So we could talk about COVID-19 HR and employment law issues for 3 hours. So today will be more, you know, we don't have that time. So today will be more of an overview. And I'm going to try to leave some time at the end to ask questions if there's something that you have a question about related to COVID-19 that I might be able to answer. So I will jump right into the presentation and let me share my screen. Okay, hopefully everybody can see that okay. Can everybody see that well? Okay, good. So there, oh, I already did my introduction. That's me. So what we're going to talk about today briefly is the state and local reopening orders. Everything's changed. So with COVID-19 legal advice, I mean, a lot of our advice is stay tuned. You know, what I tell you today might change tomorrow because there might be a new order from the state or from the local government. So we all just have to stay on top of it. So I'll just talk about where we are with the state and local reopening orders right now. Return to work considerations, what we're advising business owners to do with regard to when they have employees return to work, whether having employees return to work, and how to accommodate and deal with the issues that are involved with social distancing in the workplace and making the workplace a safe workplace in a pandemic environment. Termination issues, we're seeing a lot of businesses are needing to, you know, lay off or furlough employees for periods of time. So I'm just going to talk about two kind of key laws that you want to keep in mind if that's something that you're dealing with. Workers' comp and civil liability issues, we'll talk about that, and then unemployment and the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. And let's just jump right in. So, I mean, y'all know, unless you've been living under a rock, the governor has, I'll back up a little bit. When the beginning of the pandemic hit in mid-March or so, local governments were really taking the lead on what kind of restrictions they were going to put in place with regard to shelter in place or stay home, stay safe orders. In April, late April, the governor came out with his Open Texas plan with a 3-phase plan as to how we were going to reopen. And that plan has been adjusted as it's been needed to be adjusted, right? So the most recent one that made the big news is July 2nd. We've now got a mandatory face covering rule statewide, and there are some limited exceptions to that. You know, if you've got a health reason, or if you're in a county that has fewer than, I believe it was 100 cases, it's a really low number, and that's, most counties are not going to be covered by that exemption. So in most cases, individuals who are going out in public, going to work, going to anywhere, have to wear a face covering of some sort. And just to kind of understand the structure of how these plans have worked, the executive orders that the governor has issued, and even the local ones, permit essential services to continue their operations just as they normally would. So those are the critical, you know, obviously the hospital, medical, certain manufacturing, things that are deemed essential according to the federal government. And there's a guidance document on that. They've continued to operate. So the reopening orders they don't really address those because those were continuing to operate regardless. But the executive orders specify reopen services, and those are businesses that were required to be shut down. Now you can open following the plan of the governor. So of course, we know restaurants had a 50% now they're back to a 50% limit on occupancy. So things like that. So there's just a big difference between the essential services, which can continue to operate and always have, and then reopen services, which are these additional services that are not considered essential, but the government is allowing to open with certain restrictions, or some don't have any restrictions at this point. A really helpful tool for employers is the state of Texas's checklist. So they've got a checklist for all employers and event organizers, and these are part of the Texas governor's minimum standard health protocols. So none of these are, other than the occupancy limits, for the most part, these are all what they call minimum recommended health protocols. We got a lot of questions from clients. What does that mean? Is it mandatory or not? Minimum recommended, those seem contrary, right? So that actually, they are recommended. So they have basically checklists, like these are the things that you should and shouldn't do based on the type of business that it is. So they're really helpful. You can actually access all of those on opentexas.gov, and they're continually updated. So the last one was updated July 3rd for this checklist, which is the main one I'm looking at usually, but you can look at it for whatever environment you're in and see what the guidance is on keeping it safe according to the state. So the governor's orders provide the floor, so the minimum. So counties or cities may impose additional requirements so long as they are not inconsistent with the governor's orders. Earlier into this pandemic, once the governor came out with his orders, and then there were the local orders at the same time, there was a bit of a fight between what was consistent and not inconsistent. Where the governor found it inconsistent, he did issue letters, and those became public, and the local governments had to scale theirs back. Lately, the governor has given a little bit of authority, leeway to the local governments, and he said that local governments can prohibit, the governor is prohibiting outdoor gatherings in excess of 10 people unless the mayor or county judge approve of the gathering, and such approval can be made subject to additional conditions or restrictions pursuant to that local government. So he's allowing local governments to be a bit more, have more conditions when it pertains to outdoor gatherings in excess of 10 people, just because of the surging numbers. And you know what, that was July 2nd. We're already at July, today's 29th. That can be changed tomorrow, right? So we just have to continue to stay tuned. But right now, that is the latest guidance. So what are those return to work considerations? Any business should have a safety and health return to work plan. You don't have to call it that, but that's kind of the generic term that we're calling it. It's basically have a plan. Don't just say, oh, we're back open and everybody come on in and we'll figure it out as we go. We definitely advise our clients to have a written plan or policy, PowerPoint, something that tells managers, employees, tells the company, anybody entering the company what's going to be done to keep them safe. So you're going to have to create one to address the issues you'll need to determine before allowing the employee to return. You want to train managers and supervisors on the plan and ensure they're ready to answer questions and concerns from employees. I actually did a training last week to some city officials on how they should answer questions that they received from their employees or people at the city about concerns that they have about COVID and being safe. Employees must also be made aware of the policies and must be held accountable if not following them. So if you have a requirement that, desks have to be spaced 6 feet apart and so keeps moving their desk closer and closer to the other one in violation of the policy, you want to remind them of that policy. And if they're not following it, they could be disciplined as well, kind of as a last resort, because we really want to focus on education during a time like this that's stressful for everyone. But that's just a way to ensure that we're being safe. And so this plan will need to involve safety, any risk management, human resources, and legal is really the best way to put together this plan so you've hit all the points. OSHA is the Occupational Safe and Healthy Health Administration. They have a mandate, generally, this is non-COVID, but generally their general duty clause provides that employers must provide safe and healthy workplace for employees. So OSHA said, hey, that applies to COVID too, of course, as well. So OSHA recommends, and so does the state and local governments are recommending these types of steps that businesses should take before they reopen. Screening before entry, whether that's self-screening or via an app we're seeing that's being done, or the employee there's an email that goes to all employees and they can, print it out and put it at their home desk. If they need to come in, they need to make sure they answer certain questions and that they don't have a fever or cough or things like that. Or you can have, for some businesses, it makes more sense to have screening by somebody actually doing the screening before they enter, temperature check, things like that. So there's pros and cons to having self-screening and in-person screening. The most obvious in-person screening, you're exposing the screener and you're gonna have to dedicate personnel to deal with it. Self-screening, you're gonna have to trust the employee more so that they've done what you've asked them to do, but you're also reducing the risk of exposure to the screeners. Of course, social or physical distancing. You want to clean more than you ever had before. The CDC has really helpful guidance on their website about what kind of materials to use to decontaminate and how often to decontaminate and things like that. So that's a great guide to follow. You want to increase ventilation. This is not one that I really thought about originally, but now it's actually really popular. Open windows if you can, or work with your HVAC system at the business to see if there's something they can do, change some settings to encourage more ventilation so that if it's airborne, individuals do not get infected. You want to have policies to ensure workers do not come in to work sick. So, you might have had sick leave policies before. Now you want to make sure that they might need to be a little bit more generous so that you encourage people not to come in if they're not feeling well, because the pandemic is such a big issue. Face coverings or PPE. Well, the governor made the face covering thing a no-brainer for us now, but that had been optional previously. Signage to reinforce changes, just to remind employees, don't congregate in this area, or closing down break rooms or cafes that are at the location that wouldn't allow for real social distancing. Washing hands, you can have signage about that. The state of Texas also has some posters, they're optional, but the state has some posters that you can use with some health and safety that you could use just print out and place around your office about washing hands and distancing and safety. So those are great tools as well. Screening, of course, is really important. Just a little bit more about that. Our advice with screening is you want to be careful not to create a medical record if you don't have to, because employee medical information is confidential pursuant to the Americans with Disabilities Act. A lot of people think it's HIPAA, but it's actually ADA that governs confidentiality of employee medical records. And that would be doctor notes or things that an employee has brought to the workplace to show that they, have a reason to be out, or whatever reason they need to provide that medical documentation. So you want to, if you have documentation about a specific temperature screen, that somebody had a 100-degree fever and they were in the office and it has their name on it, you want to file that away in a confidential medical file. The EEOC, which is the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, has stated that you can now ask employees. Before COVID, this really wasn't allowed, to just ask people if they have symptoms for a disease, right? So now it's okay. The EEOC says you could ask about symptoms, and of course the state asks you to do that as well. But in addition, the EEOC says you can require testing for somebody to return to work. We're kind of at the beginning of that. The legal obligation is that the employer has to ensure that the testing is safe and reliable. So I believe there's certain certifications, and they need to go to somewhere legit as far as getting their testing services. So for some industries, that's really important to have. We're seeing sports come back, right? So testing for those athletes is really important day in and day out because of the nature of their duties. But for a lot of businesses, requiring the testing is not, that's a pretty expensive and a big task to take on. It might not be necessary because somebody could test negative one day and then positive the next day and you're still exposed. So, relying on 14 days out if somebody has symptoms or COVID can be an option in lieu of testing. The CDC and the state still recommend allowing individuals to telework if they can, because that just helps with, for the employees that do need to come into the office, it helps with the physical distancing. So they say to, of course, 6 feet separation. Ideas, we saw this a lot in Houston with some oil and gas companies. They were staggering start times, and they were having, group A of employees comes in Monday, Wednesday, Friday, group B, Tuesday, Thursday, vice versa, or maybe there's, A through F groups that they've spread about. A lot of those businesses now have actually scaled that back and had people go back home because it's an exacerbated issue in this area. So, but we might see as things calm down, going back to that soon. You could even add a later shift, which maybe employees could choose to be a part of, just to reduce the number of workers present at the same time. Okay, in the interest of time, I won't go over this one too much because it's mandatory in Texas. The only note I want to say about face coverings is so employees who cannot wear face covering due to a medical reason, for example, asthma, or maybe they have a skin condition where putting something on their face physically will have them break out or a problem, consider face shields. Those are a great option as far as accommodating employees. And so if an employee says, I can't wear this face covering, I've got the doctor note that says I can't wear a mask, you still might need to accommodate them under the ADA. So ask them, would a face shield work where it's not touching your face? Look at other options for the employee rather than saying, okay, well, you can't be here, or, our only option is you can't do your job, so you're terminated. The Americans with Disabilities Act still applies with regard to all of these issues. So we just want to be careful and not jumping to any conclusions. Another guidance point that I'd like to provide here is that the EEOC has great, these two links to their website have great some question and answer information, and they've continued to update that throughout the pandemic and as we've learned more about how this virus works. But it answers questions about what kind of inquiries, like what kind of questions can you ask of employees? How do you keep the medical files separate? How does the interactive process with the ADA work when it comes to accommodating individuals? Any kind of, I mean, not 80 questions, there's still a lot of questions that are unanswered and not on these websites, but a lot of questions are answered on the EEOC's website. So I just like to make sure people know about that information. The OSHA does require recording and reporting of COVID-19 cases in specific situations. There's a 3-step test, but bottom line, it only needs to be recorded pursuant to OSHA regulations if the COVID-19 was contracted in a way that was work-related. And now that's really hard to show these days, because we don't know if, you know, Sally got COVID at work or at the grocery store on her way home, or from her, you know, daughter who lives with her. It's hard to determine that something was directly traced to the workplace. And that's really the only time that OSHA requires a recording or reporting. So the clear line, we do know that those cases where there were clusters at work, we're pretty sure that those were situations where it was work-related, such as the meat packing plants that we heard about throughout the country. In those situations, reporting to OSHA is required. I mean, I would definitely, you know, look at the OSHA guidance, but generally, other than those situations where it's really clear, there's not a recording requirement or reporting requirement to OSHA that you had a COVID-19 case. Termination issues, I'll just go through this briefly too. There's just this is an important law. So the Workers Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act applies to employers with 100 or more full-time employees. So only large employers have to comply with this law, but it requires certain notice for mass layoffs. So there's a lot of nuances to this law, but it's good to be aware if that's your business, if you've got 100 or more full-time employees and you're considering doing a mass layoff. So that would be 50 or more employees, constituting 1/3 of the workforce at a site or facility, or 500 or more employees. There's certain notices requirements that you have to meet. Importantly, temporary layoffs less than 6 months don't count. That was often the case at the beginning of the pandemic. We were able to advise clients, well, you're only planning to have them out for 3 months. I'm sure this pandemic will be fine by the summer, and obviously we're wrong here. So, you know, now layoffs might be lasting longer and there might be some WARN obligations. There are some exceptions. Basically, if the company had to, the finances are so bad that the company is not able to provide the warning in advance and has to go ahead and lay people off, there are some exceptions. But it's just important to keep in mind this law and to seek legal guidance if this applies to you. And the Older Workers Benefit Protection Act, again, another non-COVID specific law, but one that's coming up more these days, that if you're offering severance in exchange for release of claims for somebody over 40, there's certain language that has to be in the release agreement. And sometimes there's other information that you have to disclose about who you're letting go when it involves a mass release. Again, seek legal guidance on that one as well. So workers' comp and civil liability, this is what we're calling the next frontier. You know, the question business owners are asking is, what kind of claims might employees bring that are COVID related that might, you know, sink my whole business? And I'm really concerned about that. Well, our first answer is, you know, this is going to be a whole new territory. We don't know how judges are going to consider this, how these claims are going to look. We are seeing them starting to be filed and work their way through courts. But as far as any general guidance as to how this is turning out, we don't really have that yet. But we can say that you can reduce your liability or your exposure by putting into place all these efforts that we've talked about, so that if an employee says that I am not in a safe workplace, or I got COVID because the business that I work in was so reckless, if you can show you did all these things, you had a return to work plan, you had physical distancing, you had leave policies, you followed the state and federal guidance, that's going to go a long way in defending that you acted reasonably and you weren't just, you know, running amok with regard to return to work. So that's our best advice right now. But yeah, the kinds of lawsuits we expect will be workplace safety, the I got COVID from my work kind of lawsuit, the wage and hours. So we've got people working from home and might not be tracking their hours the way that they're supposed to. And there's other issues with regard to pay and hours worked that are unique to COVID. So we're possibly going to see, we're definitely going to see cases like that I wasn't paid for all the time that I was supposed to be paid for. Retaliation claims, we're definitely keeping our eyes out for those. I was terminated because I complained about my workplace not being safe enough. Or discrimination, I was fired, or let go, laid off, not because of COVID, but because I'm pregnant or whatever the reason may be. So showing that you're acting, prudently with regard to your decisions. And again, this is a really fast-moving situation, so you're not going to get everything perfect. But showing that you made a real effort and tried to comply with the guidelines will really go a long way. So we also know now that the government they're working on the next phase of what kind of relief they're going to be providing. But this slide just goes through what the different programs are that you all might already be familiar with. But they're all going to probably change. But the most notable one is the $600 additional benefit for unemployment compensation, which has been a big help to individuals who need it. I also want to briefly talk about the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. It's a new law that was implemented in March of this year when the pandemic hit, and it provided paid leave. Really, we don't have any mandatory paid leave in America as far as nationwide. Certain states have it, mandatory paid sick leave provisions, but Texas is not one of those. But this was the first time because of COVID, the federal government did offer and is still offering certain paid leave that the government will reimburse employers for providing to their employees if they qualify. And that reimbursement is through a credit on your tax documents, basically, in reducing the amount of that you have to pay in taxes. And that credit can actually be taken right away. There's not a delay in being able to use that credit. So there's just two provisions in that law. It's the emergency paid sick leave provision and the emergency paid FMLA, or Family Medical and Leave Act, which sometimes we refer to as FMLA plus. So if you're dealing with employees who need some time off, they actually cannot work in the office and they cannot telework. Those two things have to be true first. If they can't work or telework and they meet the eligibility requirements under these laws, they may be entitled to pay that is limited. It's up to a certain number of hours. So 80 hours for the EPSL, 12 weeks for emergency paid FMLA. They can get additional pay for that time that they're not working and not being paid. And these are just the reasons. There's certain reasons that an employee may be able to take emergency paid sick leave. Of course, the obvious ones are you have COVID, right? The person has COVID. They could take emergency paid sick leave so long as they haven't run out of the time that's left on their bank of that leave. Or they've been advised by a healthcare provider to quarantine because of COVID-19. Maybe somebody in their household had it, so they're told they should not go, or they are advised, they're told via doctor's note that they have to self-quarantine. They're experiencing symptoms of COVID-19, they're seeking a medical diagnosis. The employee is caring for an individual subject or advised to quarantine or isolation. The big one, school issues, that's huge. I mean, stay tuned on that. I'll probably have a whole other presentation on what to do about school issues once some guidance is issued on that as well. But so if you cannot work or telework because you need to care for your child whose place of care is closed, then you can receive some emergency paid sick leave for the time that you're away from work to take care of those duties. The Department of Labor also has guidance. So just like I said, the EOC has a question and answer page. So does the Department of Labor. So that's just a good place if you have questions to, go to that website and see if your question might be answered there. So the key takeaways when it comes to COVID-19, for those who have COVID-19 symptoms or refuse to comply with applicable government orders, you don't want them at your business, right? Even the public, you don't want them at your business either. So you want to ensure they don't return to work or they don't come into your business, via signage or however else you communicate that. For those who express hesitation or refuse to return to work, consider whether they may be legally protected. Do they have COVID? Do they have a disability of some sort where you need to work with them to see if there's something that you can do to make the workplace safer and somewhere they're more comfortable returning to. We're finding when individuals express concerns that I don't want to return to work, I'm scared, it's not safe, or whatever the issue may be, communication might actually be the issue. They just don't know what the business is already doing to deal with COVID. And if you just communicate that to them, that actually we're cleaning every hour on the hour. And this is all the things that we're doing. They may say, oh, well, I didn't know that. I feel comfortable coming in now. Consider whether the person qualifies for leave. Consider whether they qualify for unemployment compensation. So if their hours have been reduced, they can apply with the Texas Workforce Commission, or if they've lost their job for compensation for that time period. Consider, again, our big advice is whether they can telework or even have a flexible schedule. Telework really solves a lot of the COVID problems that we're seeing. And then consider other accommodations. So just go through a lot of options before ultimately deciding that the employee cannot be accommodated and the only option is to terminate that employee. They don't have COVID, they haven't been exposed, they haven't been subject to quarantine. You've done everything to make them feel comfortable. They don't qualify for leave. You've gone through all this stuff and they still won't return to work and their job requires them to physically be in the office. You can consider whether termination is appropriate, but definitely know that you might be opening yourself up to a claim, that you might, that your lawyers like me would be able to defend really well if you do all the things we've asked you to do, but know that there is some risk there. So with that, I will just mention that my firm has a really great website, littler.com/coronavirus, where we keep all of our COVID advice to our clients, to anybody who wants to come read about our articles, about what our latest guidance is on COVID issues. So it's a really great resource. We also have a task force that is dedicated to answering questions on these issues and some other tools that we provide our clients as well. But the free tools are definitely available right there at littler.com/coronavirus. So with that, if there's time, I'm happy to take any questions. I'll let the host of this meeting decide on that. Thank you.
We do have a few minutes for questions, so if anybody would like to ask Ashley a question or put it in the chat box.
Ashley, I have a question. Tim Sedella here. Very comprehensive presentation. Thank you for being with us today. My big concern moving forward now has to do with civil protection for companies, and you shared a little bit of that. Are you seeing any of that happening now? Employees trying to file suit on an employer for reckless work environment?
We are seeing, I haven't personally seen those claims yet. And at my firm, we're sharing a lot of information in the Houston office. I don't know of another attorney within my firm that's dealing with that type of lawsuit yet, but we are hearing nationwide that those types of claims are being filed, and our firm is tracking those nationwide, but they're all in their early stages. So I don't have any guidance as to how that turned out. I know that some states are considering whether they can implement laws that limit the liability and exposure, limitations on liability kind of laws with regard to COVID, but Texas doesn't have one. I wouldn't be surprised though if next session Texas does implement one. But we're not seeing those quite yet. There might be a little bit of a delay in bringing those.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Can we get a copy of your presentation today?
Sure, yes. And I'm sorry, it was like drinking out of a fire hose, I'm sure, with this, but I wanted to hit the high points and kind of issue spots so you know what the issues are. And of course, we could deep dive another time.
Well, Ashley did such a great job covering everything. Or people are just, overwhelmed with all the information. They can't think of a good question to come up with.
No,
Thank you
no,
so
she did a
much.
fantastic job, and it seems like 4.5 months, all this information was coming in waves, and everything was changing day by day, and the FMLA and all that, and we're trying to sort through, create and update protocols, and I think your point about doing a great job of communicating to your employees, because whether or not the employees have a safe work environment, they have to feel that they have a safe work environment. And the more you can share with them, and being more lenient too, has really helped get everybody through all this. But fantastic job, Ashley. Thank you very much.
Yes,
Thanks.
thank you. Thank you, Ashley. I just wanted to say thank you. As someone in HR, it's always good to talk to another person dealing with the same issues and everything. And you gave some great guidance. And especially, I know now our upcoming issue is going back to school and some going back virtually. And then, and they could be covered under the emergency FMLA, and it's just a hard situation. And you feel for your employees, and you want to do everything you can. And it's just, I think, having an open dialogue, like you said, with your employees about that we care and we're all in this together trying to figure it out is a lot of the best ways to figure things out, and as well as the law.
Absolutely. And maybe that's why we're not seeing as many claims as we think we might. I mean, it could be that they're all getting their lawsuits together, and the attorneys are drumming up together to make some big class action or something. Maybe they're working on it behind the scenes, but it might just be that employers are, doing exactly that. They're doing their best. They're communicating. They're being compassionate and lenient where they can. And that goes a long way to limiting the kind of claims, limiting people's motivation to bring a claim against you.
Ashley,
Go ahead, John.
are you seeing anything with people possibly bringing lawsuits that are designating between an essential company and a non-essential company, somebody that, feels like they should be considered essential that's being closed down when they don't think they should?
Not in my space, because that wouldn't really be an employment lawsuit, but I have heard about those businesses suing the state, saying that the state unlawfully shut them down or categorized them as something that they didn't believe they were. So I don't think those cases have gone well for those businesses that I've seen. I'm trying to remember the last one I saw on that. But yeah, those are lawsuits against the state. So they're dealing with those primarily, or against the local government that shut them down. But in Texas, we've kind of moved to the state dealing with it. And then we're seeing, most localities and the state has a way that people can report violations or complain about things. So it might also be going through those venues, and businesses might be complaining that they're in the wrong category.
Right. Ashley, Robert Turner here. Question. Yeah. What does your firm, representing employers, what does your firm hope that the lawmakers put in place that's not in place right now to help protect your clients going forward with COVID?
Right. Yeah. I think more guidance to employers. So particular laws. We actually would like to see the Families First Coronavirus Response Act updated and for the current climate, basically based on what we're all seeing. So we think that should be amended and maybe extended, right? Because that's really a funding issue with regard to the government. And just because we think that would help our business employers deal with leaves that they might need. They want to accommodate. They don't want to fire their employees if they don't have to, or, have them go on unpaid time off. So just being able to help businesses survive through this pandemic, we want more provisions on that.
Okay, thank you.
Now, I do have a question in the chat. It says, so schools would have their own guidelines?
Yes, yes, yeah. I know the Texas Education Agency is working on that, and then local school districts as well.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Ashley. Your presentation was full of information and very helpful to many of us today. In your honor, we are going to make a donation to the Rotary Foundation in the area of peace and conflict prevention. And we thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, thank you. That's really lovely.
And our next speaker is going to be on August 5th, the Honorable Jeff Brannock, Jefferson County Judge. Reminders that the month of July is almost over, so please check that your Rotary dues for July through December have been paid. And thank you all for attending the meeting today. We're going to close it out with the four-way test of the things we think, say, or do. First, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? And fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? Have a good week and go out and find opportunities to lead and serve.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you all. Thank you, Ms. Thomas. That was so informative.
No, you're welcome.
Very helpful to most everyone in the club is in some sort of business, and so that is very helpful to know all those questions that come up.
Right. Yes. And y'all can actually, I wasn't sure if I say this, but y'all could email me if you have other follow-up questions. We're providing a lot of kind of free advice here and there, you know, during this weird time. So, yeah, feel free.
Ashley, this is Jackie. Emailed you that I'm the executive director of the club. Do I have your permission? I'm sorry, I didn't ask you before now. I usually do that in our test session. May I recorded today's session? May I post it on our website for the members who couldn't attend today?
Sure, yes.
Yes, thank you. And these people will reference back to it and find your PowerPoint presentation there.
Great, sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, and you can share my contact info with everybody, but it's in the presentation. I'll send you a PDF of the presentation to email out.
Okay, that'll be perfect. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you all for coming. Anybody else have any questions quick?
Good. No, ma'am. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Ashley. Bye-bye.
Okay, I will post it, guys, and it'll be on the website later this evening.
Sounds good. Thanks, Jackie.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good to see everybody.